The BBC show Merlin was a fan favourite as soon as it came out in 2008, all the way to when it finished in 2012. The show followed a young sorcerer named Merlin, and followed his journey as he tried to fulfil his destiny and help the young Prince Arthur become the legendary king we've all heard of. But, with the fan base still very much alive nearly 2 decades on from when the show first premiered, there has always been debates and discussions about the show itself. A lot of what ifs. And that's what I'm going to focus on in this series. The many different scenarios and situations that would have occurred if certain changes were made to the show. And for the first episode, I thought, why not start with one of the biggest changes that could have been made? Some people's biggest pet peeve in the entire show. For you see, what most people, myself included, were waiting for was for Arthur to find out. There were multiple times where I was like, this is it. But it never was. There were 65 episodes of Merlin, and Arthur knew Merlin had magic for only one of them. For 64 episodes, Merlin used magic to protect his king and Camelot, and Arthur had no idea. But what if he did? What if Arthur knew he had the most powerful sorcerer ever to walk the earth, right next to him, at all times? What if Arthur found out Merlin had magic?
You've lied to me all this time.
The first thing I asked myself was when. In my hypothetical new version of the show, when would Arthur have worked it out? When would he have been told? Because like I said, there were multiple times in the show that Arthur could have found out.
It was me. It was me who used magic to kill Gwen's father.
And so, to get other fans' opinions, I took to the Merlin Reddit and I asked, if Arthur actually found out Merlin had magic, what would have been the perfect moment for him to find out? And the responses varied. Some thought that season 1 or 2 were too early, but some thought that season 5 was too late. There were suggestions that he should have found out when Uther died and he became king. But there were also suggestions that he should have found out when they went to protect Ealdor, all the way back in season 1. I thought long and hard about when Arthur was going to find out in my new alternative version. There were certain things in the show that I deemed too important, that I thought would change and possibly not happen if Merlin's magic wasn't a secret. So, I decided that in my new version of the show, Arthur was going to find out in season 5, episode 2, Arthur's Bane, part 2.
A little bit of, carrot in your hair.
Now, look, I know what you're probably thinking. 1 out of 65 was bad. 12 out of 65 doesn't sound too much better. And you're right. I wanted Arthur to know for as long as possible. He could have found out in episode 1 for all I care. But I thought about it, and decided that for my new version, this was when Arthur was going to find out. The next thing I had to think about was how. Now, this was obviously something I thought about when picking the time, purely because I didn't just want the perfect time, but I wanted the perfect moment. A moment that I could have imagined on TV whilst watching the show, and think, wow, this is how I wanted it to happen. I wanted it to be epic. I was a fan of the way they did it in the show, but I wanted something different for my version. I wanted the opposite. So, this is how it happens in my version. For all of you that don't remember the opening 2-parter of season 5, it ends with Arthur and Merlin infiltrating Morgana's cave to save the knights that had been forced to work for Morgana. Don't worry, I'm not changing this part, for obvious reasons. But I am changing the reason the knights are taken. I'm simply changing it to Morgana just wanting more slaves. She's not searching for anything. This change is due to something that happens later, but it also allows me to get rid of whatever this actually is.
Today. Oh my God, what is that? Oh my God, what is that?
So I see it as killing two birds with one stone. And then, onto one of the last scenes of the episode, Morgana corners Arthur, throws Merlin to the side when he comes in, and right as she's about to kill Arthur is stabbed in the back by Mordred. Now, I like this. I liked Mordred as a Knight of Camelot. But I'm changing it. And this is where, in my version, the story really changes. In my version, it changes when Merlin walks in. Merlin's not thrown to the side, but instead spoken to. Morgana sighs when she sees him. "Of course you're here," she'll say through a wicked smirk. "You're always there. Right at the exact moment you need to be. To protect your precious king." It would be at this moment we see Arthur react a little bit, for he doesn't truly know how much Merlin has actually stopped Morgana over the years. However, things would only get worse for Merlin, as Mordred would begin to speak. "Do you not think that strange, Morgana?" He would then begin to say, "How a mere servant always manages to stand in your way." We would then see Morgana's eyes flicker, as if a thought would cross her mind for a split second. But no, that's impossible. But then, Mordred would continue. "It's as if you two are intertwined. It's as if he's your destiny, and he's your doom." And we would then see everyone react to that. Merlin, Arthur, and then Morgana. And the look of confusion would appear on her face, before then slowly changing to a look of pure rage. And she would use her magic to suddenly send her dagger towards Merlin, who would simply raise a hand and stop it mid-air. And that would be it. The first time Merlin would use magic, knowing that Arthur was watching him, and he would look back at Arthur with a hint of sadness in his eyes, and the king would look back at him, speechless. Morgana would then immediately take a step back. "Emrys," she would whisper, horrified of the revelation that it had been Merlin, who was once her friend, that she had been terrified of for the last few years. And she would then look around her and murmur a spell under her breath, and the cave's ceiling would begin to crumble. And whilst Morgana and Mordred would run in one direction, Merlin would run over to Arthur and hold out his hand to help him up so they could also escape. But Arthur would hesitate. He would eventually take his hand, and the two would run in the opposite direction. But the hesitation had already happened, and Merlin had noticed it. So, we've worked out when and how Arthur finds out Merlin has magic in my new version. Now, what we have to talk about is the aftermath. Now, I would love to make this easy. I'd love to say that Arthur wouldn't care one bit, that after this revelation, they'd go around acting like they normally would, as if nothing had changed. But I think we all know that wouldn't happen. We see little bits of it in the actual show, but I do truly think Arthur's reaction was heavily subdued due to the state he was actually in.
Leave me.
In my version, his reaction would be bigger. Merlin had lied to him. His best friend, whether he'd admit that or not, had betrayed him. And Arthur was raised to fear magic, and to think that sorcerers were evil and the enemy. And so, in the last scene of this episode, that's how he would treat Merlin. The two would walk into the throne room, clearly after journeying the entire way back in silence. But as Arthur would storm in, he would walk to the other side of the room and face away from Merlin. "You are to leave Camelot, and never return." "No," Merlin would reply, shocked. "No, Arthur, I can't, You're a sorcerer, Merlin. You're lucky I'm not chopping your head off." But Merlin would continue to plead, desperate to stay. "No, Arthur, please. I've only ever used magic to help you, to protect you." But then Arthur would turn around, and we would see his eyes filled with tears. "I can't trust you, Merlin. You lied to me for so long, and I can't trust you. And I can't have someone by my side that I can't trust. So leave, Merlin, and never come back." And Merlin would slowly walk to the door, open them, and simply say, "I'm sorry, Arthur," before leaving completely and ending the episode. And that would be the end of episode 2. Depressing, I know. But don't worry, I'm not going to leave it there, because the aftermath of Arthur finding out Merlin had magic wouldn't end there. The next change I would make would actually be an episode switch. For in the actual show, the next episode would be the death song of Uther Pendragon. However, I'll be switching episode 3 and 5 around. So in my version, the next episode would be the Desire. Now, in the actual episode, it focuses on Arthur being judged by the Desire and the Triple Goddess for rejecting the old religion. In my version, that part of the story still remains, but what else happens in the episode would change. The new adaptation of the episode would start the same way, with the Desire passing Oscar the coin and being sent to pass on the message to Arthur. After the intro, we would then head to the throne room. Tension would clearly fill the air, as people would clearly suspect something being wrong with Arthur, but no one would dare ask what it was. But, just like the original episode, Leon would then explain that Oscar had mortally wounded one of the knights, and an old childhood friend of Arthur's, and the king would then decide to leave Camelot, to bring Oscar to justice. However, in this version, without Mordred and Merlin. What would also be happening in this new adaptation of the episode is a new Merlin storyline. We would see Merlin wake up and walk out of his quarters to see that he was back in his home village Ealdor. He would walk outside and look around his old village, his home once again, and a look of disappointment would be clear on his face. His mother would then walk over to him and tell him he had a visitor waiting for him. Excited, Merlin would then hurry inside. However, sat at the table, he would then see the person he least expected. Mordred. We would then cut back to Arthur and the knights. The majority of what happens in the original episode would still happen. They would go hunting for the sorcerer, Ellian and Gawain would find him, and just like in the original, Gawain would stab him, and Osgar would then make his way to Arthur, who this time would be alone. Most of the conversation itself would be the same. Osgar would explain to Arthur that he had been sent to pass on a message, that Arthur was to be judged by the Desire for rejecting the old religion. However, in this version, after receiving the coin, Arthur would raise his sword to Osgar and whisper, You killed a good man. A friend. And Osgar would then look up at him, seconds away from death, and reply, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kill him. But I wouldn't have needed to if I wasn't always hunted and persecuted for simply being who I am. Osgar would then fall to the ground and die. Another scene that would change is the one straight after that. In the original, Mordred catches Merlin making Osgar a marked grave, and we hear a line about it not being permitted.
What would the king say? Sorcerers are not permitted marked graves.
In my version, however, it would be Arthur making the grave, with Leon walking up behind him questioning what it was he was doing, as sorcerers weren't permitted marked graves, to which Arthur would stand and simply say, he was a man, Leon. That's all that should be important. It would be a simple line and a simple action from Arthur, but I feel it would come across so much bigger than that. It would be obvious to the audience that Arthur would have Merlin in mind, and it would be obvious that Arthur's thoughts towards sorcery would be becoming more and more conflicting. The next scene in the new version of this episode would be of Merlin, as he would sit down to talk to Mordred. The two would sit in silence for a beat, before Mordred would eventually speak. I know you're angry with me, Emerus. I kept your secret for years, and I revealed it at what seemed to be the worst time imaginable, and to the worst person, or people. If it makes you feel any better, the Lady Morgana was as shocked as you. I've heard she's been whispering the names Merlin and Emerus over and over again for the past few days. The rumours are she's went mad, probably trying to make sense of it all. Why? Merlin would then simply ask, and Mordred would smile at him wickedly. Isn't it obvious, Emerus? To show you who King Arthur truly is. A coward. How many times have you saved his life? And look how he's treated you, since he found out you were simply born the way you were. There will be a war soon, Emerus. Morgana wants the throne. She feels it's rightfully hers. And you? Merlin would reply. What do you want? Justice. Arthur has been called to be judged by the Desir, by the Triple Goddess, on whether or not he accepts the old religion. And you and I both know that he will say that magic has no place in Camelot. And so, they will aid Morgana in some way, as punishment. He might surprise you, Merlin would reply, and Mordred would smile. It's his destiny to unite the land of Albion, Mordred. Arthur will see sense. Perhaps. But is it not too late for that? Where is the justice? He saved you. He did. But how many did he not? How many did he watch his father condemn? Every day, more of our kind suffer and die, Emerus, because of your precious king and his hatred. If he truly disagreed with his tyrant of a father, then why hasn't he lifted the ban on magic since becoming king? If you believe Arthur is so bad, then why didn't you just let Morgana kill him in that cave? Why turn Morgana's attention to me? But once again, Mordred would simply smile and slowly walk away from Merlin. But as he would then get to the door, he would turn back around. You said it yourself, Merlin. Arthur saved me. So, in return, I saved him. But we're even now. I owe him no more favours. And Mordred would then leave, ending that scene. Now, in the original episode, Arthur obviously meets with the Desir 3 times. Once, when they tell him to accept the old religion, and Mordred gets mortally wounded.
Get down, Mr. President!
Again, when he comes back to beg for Mordred's life. And once again when he decides, with Merlin's help, to reject the old religion. In my version, he's only going to meet with them once. However, there would be an extra scene before he would. A simple conversation between Arthur and Gaius. Similar to the actual episode, Arthur would ask about the Desir and the Triple Goddess and where to find them. Gaius would explain everything he knew, but as Arthur would get up to leave, he would turn back to Gaius and sigh. I'm choosing to believe Merlin, when he told me you had no knowledge that he was a sorcerer. But maybe I'm just telling myself that, so I don't lose another friend. And Gaius would drop his head. However, just before Arthur would leave, he would speak up. Magic is not the enemy, sire. Perhaps not, Arthur would reply. But it is because of magic that my mother is dead, Gaius. Magic has caused the corruption of those closest to me, and for all my life, I've only ever seen it used for evil. It's chaotic, and I fear that if I accept it, it would be an uncontrollable force that I wouldn't be able to contain, and I would be risking the lives of the people of Camelot. Something I will never do. The next scene would once again be something similar to the original episode. We would see Merlin call for the Great Dragon, this time just in a different location, and ask about the Desir and the Triple Goddess, just like Arthur. And just like in the actual episode, Kilgara would explain that Arthur would be judged on whether or not he chose to accept the old religion. And Merlin would sigh. He's not going to. He's going to reject the old religion and magic in Camelot. And they're going to help Morgana in some way. And the prophecy I saw will come to pass. Mordred's going to kill Arthur. I should have just killed him when I had the chance. I have warned you about the Druid boy before. I know. But I tried that way with Morgana, didn't I? Was that the right way? You have a good heart, young warlock. But sometimes, I believe that to be your downfall. And the scene would then finish with the same line.
You had a chance to kill the Druid boy once before. If you have another, you must not fail.
Leaving Merlin to question if he had already missed his chance. And it was already too late. We would then join Arthur, making his way to the Desir, this time without Merlin and Mordred. The scene would obviously focus mainly on Arthur, and the choice that he was about to make. I'd want the audience to be asking themselves what they thought Arthur was going to do. Obviously, everyone would want him to accept the old religion and magic itself. But would he? Arthur and the knights would then reach the cave, and this time, without Merlin to suggest otherwise, the knights and Arthur would go in with their swords, and as disrespectfully as they did originally. The scene would then be very similar to the first meeting in the actual episode. Arthur would question who they were to judge him. He would argue that his reign had been fair, noble and just, but the Dizir would argue that he had been rejecting the old religion and persecuting its followers. However, this time, when the Dizir would insult Arthur and Gawain would get angry, Arthur would stop him. "You want me to accept magic? Your father treated magic as his foe. So, we ask you now, Arthur Pendragon, is magic your enemy?" And in that moment, Arthur would freeze and see Merlin. But then, he would see Valiant, Nimue, Morgause, everyone who had ever used magic against him, and the kingdom of Camelot. And then, he would see Morgana. "I'm sorry," Arthur would then eventually say. "I cannot accept magic in Camelot." And the Dizir would bow their heads. "Foolish Arthur Pendragon. The decision has been made. Your fate has been sealed. And for one that is only alive now because of magic. If you speak of what my father did, I cannot. What your father did? What Emerus has done for you?" And Arthur would pause, and the other knights would look at him, confused. "You mean Merlin?" And the Dizir would nod. "I never asked him to do any of that. I had no idea." "No, you don't. You still do not. So let us show you, Arthur Pendragon. Let us show you all magic has done for you. And ask yourself again, if magic is truly your enemy." The next moment would be the thing I think we missed out on most in the show. As in that moment, the Dizir would then show Arthur, and all the knights with him, all the times Merlin had saved Arthur by using magic. The first time he saved Arthur, when he stopped Valiant, Nimue, Morgana, the Great Dragon, in the caves with Agravain, everything. And all Arthur and the other knights could do was watch, in astonishment. And after seeing all of this, a small tear would appear in Arthur's eye, before he would then leave the cave. We would then head back to Merlin, in the Eldor. He'd be folding clothes, when suddenly, he'd hear, "I've never seen you fold so neatly in your life." And Merlin would then turn around to see Arthur, standing across from him. He would go to speak, but Arthur would raise his hand quickly. "I'm sorry, Merlin. The Dizir showed me everything. Everything you've done for me, for Camelot. I am so sorry that you had to hide who you were. Because you would have chopped my head off," Merlin would say, with the hint of a smile, and Arthur would laugh. "I want you to accompany me back to Camelot." "But you said..." "I know what I said, Merlin, and I was wrong. Plus, I've dealt without a manservant for far too long. You'll have a lot of chores to catch up with." Merlin would smile, but he would still hesitate for a moment. "After everything, Arthur. Everything I've done. Can you trust me?" And Arthur would look back at Merlin. after seeing what you've done, Merlin. Everything you did to protect Camelot. To protect me. How could I not? Merlin would then walk towards Arthur, and the pair would walk together, back to Camelot, with Arthur putting a hand on Merlin's shoulder. The two sides of the same coin, reunited. In my new version, the episode would finish just like the original, with a conversation between Gaius and Merlin. And just like in the original episode, Merlin would be afraid that the Dazir had already judged Arthur, and in some way aided Morgana. Gaius would try and console Merlin, by saying that Arthur did in fact accept magic, by accepting him. But Merlin would still fear that the Dazir had already made their decision, and that despite Arthur forgiving Merlin himself, that maybe it was still too late. And that would be the end of episode 3, and as far as I'll go in terms of changes for this video. I hope you enjoyed my adaptation. I thought revealing Merlin's magic to Arthur, but have Arthur actually see all that Merlin had done for him over the years, was a fresh take on the magic reveal. The next few episodes as well would obviously change dramatically, but I feel that some would be as equally fantastic as the original episodes, if not more so. For instance, in my version, episode 5, The Death Song of Uther Pendragon, would be incredibly different. How in this new adaptation, Uther wouldn't just seek revenge on his son for making Gwen queen, and non-noblemen knights, but also for allowing Merlin to be anywhere near him and Camelot itself. The episode would be bigger, with new stakes and consequences. A new version of that episode that could perhaps end with Arthur lifting the ban on magic. It's interesting to think how different the rest of the series, the show itself, and even the finale would be with Merlin's magic not being a secret. Would some of the villains be easier to defeat? Or would Merlin being able to use his magic openly still not be enough? And would the ending still remain the same? I'd love to know what you think on how the ending would possibly differ, if Arthur knew of Merlin's magic before the finale, and if you think it would actually be enough to save the once and future king. I'd love to make a follow-up video to this though, giving the cliffhanger I left it on, with the Dazir having to aid Morgana in a different way, and the new choices that I've made. I have a rough idea of how the rest of the new version of the series would go. So, please make sure to let me know if you'd like to hear more of what would happen in this alternative version, as well as what other what-ifs you'd like me to make a video about. But, for those that have liked this video, and would like more Merlin content, then I have good news. As well as this what-if series I intend on continuing, I also have a few new projects that I'm happy to announce. For after years and years of talking about it, a Merlin rewatch series, as well as a new Merlin podcast, are on the way.
I was as surprised as you are. He can't get enough of it.
Myself and a friend will be watching every single episode of Merlin, with highlights as well as full extended cuts being available. And we will then discuss every episode in depth on our new Merlin podcast, Anywhere But the Tavern. I'm super excited to begin this new project, as well as making more videos on the channel. So, if you like my videos and would like to watch more, and listen to the podcast when it comes out, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.
You know what you need after a hard day's hunt?
Sleep.
A nice cold tankard of mead. Pub's not that way, mate.
It's down there. Where are you
We'll just
going?
back up to the pub.